Facts First presents Roy Rogers lived a life none of us will ever forget. Roy Rogers starred in over 100 radio shows, TV shows, and films. He was considered a national treasure. Over the years, his name and looks were transferred to books, toys, comic books. Family was everything to Roy Rogers, too, and his wife Dale Evans. The couple had 9 children, 5 of which were adopted. And like any family, their lives weren't perfect. They had their own share of family tragedy. The family museum had over $200,000 per year before it had to be shut down. Roy Rogers lived a life none of us will ever forget, but he did have his secrets. He started at the bottom. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Sly on November 5, 1911 in Cincinnati, Ohio. When he was young, his father gave him a horse as a gift. He was raised on a farm near Lucasville, which helped him with his knowledge of horsemanship. Growing up, he learned to sing, dance, and play the mandolin. Since his family didn't have a radio, he had to make his own music, and he entertained the family. He even organized a square dance once. Joining the Rocky Mountaineers. When Roy was 19 years old, he moved with his family to California. He and his father were truck drivers and fruit pickers. Roy loved to sing, so in 1931 he tried out for a Los Angeles radio show called The Midnight Frolics. His voice was very impressive, and that led to a Western group called the Rocky Mountaineers asking him to join. At the time, he was still a bit shy when performing in front of others who weren't his family. He overcame his fear little by little, though, and he toured with the band in New Mexico and Arizona. The hardest part of touring was the lack of food because they had to live on a tight budget. The Pioneers Trio. While touring with the Rocky Mountaineers, Roy got close to the fellow band members Bob Nolan and Tim Spencer. Together, they formed a group in 1933 called the Pioneers Trio. Spencer was the lead singer, Nolan played the bass, and Roy played the guitar. In 1934, they brought Hugh Farr into the band, and he played the fiddle. They were so young that when they played on the radio, the announcer changed their name to the Sons of the Pioneers. They were very popular in the U.S., and their famous songs were Cool Water and Tumbling Tumbleweeds. Changing his name. While playing in the bands, Roy used his given name, Leonard Sly. When he had an opportunity, though, to appear in Western films, he landed a supporting role in a 1935 film. Gene Autry had the lead role, and when Autry wanted more money from the studio, they started searching for a cowboy who could sing. Roy was chosen, and the Republic Pictures studio changed his name to Roy Rogers, and he landed his first leading role. The name of the film was Under the Western Stars. Roy's sidekick. When Roy prepared for his first leading role, the studio allowed him to pick a horse that would be his sidekick. They lined up 5 rented horses, and he chose a yellow-haired Palomino stallion. The horse's name was Golden Cloud. Roy liked the horse so much that he bought him in 1943. Roy thought the horse's name didn't fit his intelligence or swiftness, though, so he renamed the horse Trigger. Before Roy bought Trigger, the horse already had had some success in Hollywood. In The Adventures of Robin Hood, Olivia de Havilland wrote him. A really talented horse. Trigger was very smart and talented. He knew how to sit down in a chair, he could sign an X with a pencil, he could lie down for a nap, even cover himself up. He learned over 150 cues, and he could walk on his hind legs for 50 feet. He could do amazing tricks, but he often ruined the tricks. Each time he heard applause, he would bow, regardless of the trick he was doing. Roy's love life. While Roy's professional life was heating up, so was his love life. His first wife was an admirer named Lucille Ascalise. Their marriage only lasted a few years, and the couple divorced. During his radio tour, Roy met Grace Arline Wilkins in 1933 in Roswell, New Mexico. The two married in 1936, and they adopted a daughter named Cheryl Darlene. In 1943, Grace gave birth to a daughter named Linda Lou. She also gave birth to a boy named Ray Jr., also known as Dusty, before she died of childbirth complications in 1946. Dale Evans. Roy and Dale met when they collaborated on a movie together in 1944. A few years after Grace had already passed away, Roy and Dale fell in love. Before meeting Roy, Dale had eloped at the young age of 14 and gave birth to a son when she was 15. When her marriage fell apart, she pursued a radio career and had 2 more husbands before meeting Roy. Those marriages ended, which led her to Roy. A marriage and a baby. The couple was at a rodeo at the Chicago Stadium when Roy proposed to Dale. In 1947, they were married at the same place they filmed Home in Oklahoma together. Shortly after, Dale gave birth to a baby girl named Robin Elizabeth. She was born with Down syndrome and died from mumps before she was 2 years old. Dale loved her daughter and wrote a book in her honor called Angel Unaware. A tribute. Dale's book was very inspirational. The book led to discussions among Americans and the disabled. People were amazed at how hands-on the couple was when caring for their disabled daughter. There's a training center for children now with developmental disabilities in Dale's name called the Dale Rogers Training Center in Oklahoma. After the loss of their daughter, the couple adopted children Mimi, Dodie, Sandy, and Debbie, and they had a lot of love to give, so they gave it to the children without homes. Tragedy. Losing their daughter Robin wasn't the only tragedy the family suffered. Their adopted daughter Debbie was born in Korea. When she was 12, she died. She was on a school bus that crashed into 7 cars on the highway, and Debbie was one of the 8 students who died in the accident. Their son John David, also known as Sandy, died when he was 18 years old. He enlisted in the Army and was deployed to Germany, and he died in a military hospital there in 1965. A flourishing career. While growing his family, Roy continued to focus on his career. He did plenty of public appearances, but all the money went to Republic Pictures. In 1940, he initiated a clause in his contract that would allow him to use his likeness and his voice for merchandise. He was a huge star, so he had action figures with his likeness. He was also the subject of cowboy adventure novels, play sets, and a Dell comic strip. All of them featured him, and finally the money was his. The Roy Rogers Show. On December 30th, 1951, Roy got his own TV show. It was called The Roy Rogers Show, and he played the owner of a ranch in Mineral City. His wife also starred in the show. She played the owner of the town hotel and cafe. Trigger was also in the show, and so was the family dog, a German Shepherd named Bullet the Wonder Dog. The show was on NBC. It ended on June 9, 1957, after 100 episodes. Still working. After The Roy Rogers Show was canceled, he and his wife tried a comedy variety show called The Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Show. It couldn't stand up against the Jackie Gleason Show, and it ended after 3 months. Roy continued, though, to act, and he played a cowboy on Wonder Woman and on The Muppet Show. His last motion picture was called Macintosh and TJ. It was filmed in Texas and debuted in 1975. Privacy. Roy and Dale did what they could to keep Hollywood from affecting the children the way it had with many kids. They moved out to a ranch so that the kids could grow up with horses, pigs, cows, and chickens. Also, Roy liked his privacy. Dusty didn't agree with Roy's decision to keep his kids from the limelight, and by the time he finished high school, Dusty had starred in 2 films. Roy wasn't happy about it. Leaving home and coming back. Roy didn't want his son to be an actor. He had a job for 2 weeks where he was to test the seams in napalm bombs. When he quit, his father was mad, and that led Dusty to leave home and live with friends. He was hoping to start a career in Ohio, but while out on his own, he realized how important his father was to people outside the home. When he returned to Apple Valley, he wanted to smooth things out with his father. Dusty was worried that his father would die before he had a chance to tell him that he loved him. Goodbye, Trigger. Trigger lived a wonderful, long life with Roy. In 1965, he died in Apple Valley on Roy's ranch. To honor his sidekick, Roy preserved Trigger. He had him mounted by Bishop's Taxidermy. In 1967, Roy and Dale opened the Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Museum, and Trigger was there on display, and that allowed fans to say their own goodbyes to Trigger. Other pets. Trigger wasn't the only family pet to be placed in the museum after death. In 1957, Bullet the Wonder Dog died, and he was preserved and added to the display as well. The same was true with Dale's buckskin quarter horse named Buttermilk. She died in 1972 and was added to the collection. To keep the animals looking pristine, they had to be brushed daily, and their glass eyes had to be cleaned. relocating the museum. The family museum was moved from Apple Valley to Victorville, California in 1976. When it was moved, it became a major attraction. People flocked to the museum to see something that would remind them of Roy, Dale, and the Westerns they watched while growing up on television. In 2003, the museum was relocated yet again, this time to Branson, Missouri. When the couple died, the IRS levied a high tax on the Rogers estate. The children were hoping to relocate the museum to an area where more tourists would visit, which could earn enough money to keep it open. The museum closed. Relocating the museum did not help bring in tourists, and thanks to other honky-tonks and tourist attractions in Branson, the museum finally closed. It wasn't what the children wanted, but they had no other choice. They weren't making enough money to keep the doors open. Roy Rogers Restaurant. In 1968, the first Roy Rogers restaurant opened. They served fried chicken, burgers, and roast beef sandwiches. Roy had no connection to the chain, but he did issue a license for his moniker for the franchise. There's a drink named after him that contains no alcohol. It's a Coca-Cola, grenadine syrup, and maraschino cherry. If you want to try one, just go to any bar anywhere and ask for a Roy Rogers. Cameo roles. During his career, he played in plenty of westerns in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He also made some memorable cameo appearances in the TV show Wonder Woman, The Fall Guy, even The Muppet Show. He also took part in the Randy Travis video Heroes and Friends in 1990. The video shows Roy and Dale in their best days on TV, and in the end, Roy makes an appearance. Happy Trails Children's Foundation. Roy and Dale founded a few charities. The one that was closest to their hearts was the Happy Trails Children's Foundation, which worked to combat child abuse. Dale and Roy loved children, and they believed that child abuse was becoming an epidemic, so they wanted to do something about it, which is why they started their charity. What do you find is the most impressive thing about Roy Rogers? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe for more.